Welcome to the Gravel Paddock, the podcast that takes you directly inside a professional gravel peloton. I'm your host, Antonin Liverset, Sports Marketing Manager. Here, we bypass the fluff and talk about what actually matters: raw race tactics, pro tech setup, and the unfiltered business of modern racing. From the UCI World on Gravel Earth Series to the American monuments of the Life Time Grand Prix, the race starts here. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome to the episode 10 of the Gravel Paddock podcast, where we talk about pro gravel racing. Today, we are exploring endurance performance, mental resilience, and a raw race debrief fresh off the volcanic trails of Iceland. My guest is an Olympian, a former Lifetime Grand Prix overall winner, a PhD student, and the recent winner of the Rift. Welcome to the pod, Harry Smith.
Thanks. Thanks for asking me to be on.
So let's start with a few questions about your career to introduce yourself to the audience. As mentioned, you've been at the Olympics in Tokyo, and also you said that the pre-Tokyo version of yourself is gone and that your relationship with racing completely changed after these Olympic Games. What was the biggest mental shift when transitioning from a 90-minute XCO World Cup race or Olympic Games to the long-distance gravel scene, because it's kind of completely different?
Yeah, it's totally different. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that I'm a different racer and a different person now than I was before Tokyo. It was really just sort of a monumental inflection point in my life, and a lot of things changed. But in terms of racing, it really is. It's kind of like going from being a 10K road runner to being an ultra, like an ultra marathoner. So it is very, very different. But I would say that in order to be the best that you can be at either discipline, it's a very similar mindset and mental investment that's required. But now with the perspective that I have from having partially achieved my Olympic dream by being there, but falling very far short of what my goals were, I just have a different outlook on sport. And so I approach gravel with this sort of different outlook. And then there's the things like, with the XCO racing, it's pretty intimidating, it's scary, there's lots of big features and rocks and jumps, so, I don't have to encounter that so much in gravel racing, and there's lots of little things that are different between the sports, but overall, you have to be the same kind of go get 'em, laser focused type of racer in order to succeed.
Okay, and as I mentioned too, you are balancing life as a privateer with a PhD in sports psychology. So you've admitted to struggling with the feeling of never being done in academia because it's long study. We know how the medical study are versus the clear finish lines we have in racing. So how do you physically and mentally structure your week?
Yeah, that is something that I really struggle with, and I'm sure lots of people who have more traditional jobs can relate. It's hard to go home from work or to go home from my schoolwork and turn it off because these projects are they're on such a long time frame, and I don't have those immediate progress checks and, like you said, literal finish lines that we have in racing. So I try to set objectives for myself in the short term. So whenever I have a paper that I'm working on, for example, or a study, I sort of create my own deadlines and my own targets as it were for those projects. And then I try to structure my days and take stock of what I'm actually doing in my days to give myself that feeling of progress. So for example, today I had a 4-hour training session, and then I'm intending to spend about an equivalent amount of time on schoolwork. But one thing I do is I have a timer running in the background while I'm doing my schoolwork so that when I get to the end of the day, I can see, oh, I did some substantial work on this project that I'm investing time in. And that kind of gives me that sense of just like you start and stop your Wahoo on your bike, you kind of start and stop the timer on the work aspect of it. And that helps with that a little bit.
So you keep tracking with the time you're spending in both disciplines, let's say.
Yeah, yeah.
And aside of this, you also recently launched Competere, a mentorship program for women and girls in endurance sports. And so, what is the core mission behind this, and how important is it for you to redefine success for the next generation?
Yeah, so Competere is less about success on the race course and more about inviting and helping facilitate more women to have fulfilling experiences in sport, in whatever sport they're interested in. And it was really born out of my dissertation work and my research, which is on interest. So how do we leverage this psychological experience of being interested in something to help people build athletic identities and choose to return to sport and to engage in sport so that they get all of the amazing benefits that come with being physically active in a chosen competitive environment. So like I said, I'm less I mean, I obviously I would like the next generation of racers to be healthy, happy, successful, pushing the limits of what's possible, but my personal focus is bringing the benefits of sport to all women regardless of if they're concerned about competing at the highest level or doing their first 50-kilometer ride. Like it doesn't I don't really care what the competitive outcome is, but I'm very invested in helping more women feel at home and to identify with cycling as a sport.
Yeah, and I'll put the link of the Competere program in the description, so if someone is interested, they could check it out. It's really,
Thanks.
really, really nice to do this. Thanks for the sport. It's really important for endurance sport to have athletes who also give back this way. It's
Mm,
great
thank
things
you.
to do. And last question within this intro. So you were at the Canadian National Gravel Championship on Vancouver Island mid-June. The event made headlines because it was cancelled mid-race for the women, and some of the men already finished the race, the top guys, with the organization saying that emergency services were overwhelmed by the heatwave. But information online is pretty vague, so it's hard to really know what happened and how the racers experienced it. So could you give us the inside story of what actually happened on the course and how you reacted to this?
Yeah, so it was a failure in organization, really, that led to this, or a mistake in organization. It was quite hot. It wasn't insanely hot, but it was quite hot. And the course was on private logging roads, and there was only one road to get around. So we as racers were not allowed to have our own support at feed zones. So we were relying on what we could carry and on the neutral support provided out there because they couldn't have cars driving on this one loop. That also meant that if there was a medical emergency, there was only one road for a service, like an ambulance or something, to get to the injured person or the person in need. And it was the race course route. That coupled with the fact that there was only, to my knowledge, one like ambulance available for the entire race. And so those kind of all created this perfect storm. And like I said, it was quite hot. And whether or not it was absolutely hot in terms of like just the absolute number is a little bit irrelevant because it's what the local people are adapted for or are not adapted for. And it was sort of the first really hot week out in BC. So even though it was only like 32 or 33 degrees, you're not used to it. That can be problematic for your body. And there were lots of amateurs out there. Anyways, about 100 kilometers or 95 kilometers of the way into the race, and the race was 125 kilometers, I was stopped at the top of the final climb, leading into a very, very high speed technical descent. So, for reference, I hit over 80 kilometers an hour on this really loose gravel descent that probably shouldn't have been in a race course. Anyways, I was stopped by, I didn't know if they were a race official or not. It was just a person in a pickup truck, and he had a clipboard. And he said, "The race is over, it's canceled." And he put his arms out and he blocked my way across the road. And I was like, so I thought someone had died on this descent because it was right in front of the most technical descent of the course and he was preventing me from going downhill.
Mm.
But he didn't really have any more information. He wrote down my number plate and he said, "The race is over, stop racing, but you still have to get back to town." And the only way to get back to town was to continue to ride the exact same course of the race. Anyway, so I I shut it down essentially because I was worried about people out there. He told me there were medical emergencies. I didn't know what was going on. So I rode that last 25 kilometers very easy. And I did end up having to kind of like help some amateurs along the way who were just in dire straits because they had
Yeah.
no nutrition or water or anything like that. Anyways, so I don't really know what else to say about it. It was very confusing. Like we don't have that much more clarity than you have
Okay.
as a spectator. It shouldn't have happened. There should have been better organization and better fail safes in place so that, you know, more ambulances, more
Yeah.
water,
Yeah.
allowing us to have our own feed zones. Like there should have been something, but it is what it is, and we just kind of have to roll with it. And move on from it, I guess. It's very frustrating, but
No Canadian champion this
no,
for 2027
no.
on both men and women side.
Yeah, and I mean, we spent a lot of money to go out there, we invested a lot in preparation. There was lots of performance incentives on the line that we don't have access to now, so it's very, very frustrating. It's not just a headline. For us, it's a lot of lost income and a lot of wasted expenses, but it is what it is.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's also the place we are at with gravel right now. It needs to grow, and you need to learn from your mistakes. So
Mhm,
yeah, it will be better in the future. At
mhm.
least we hope. We all hope, and we all work
Yes.
for it.
Yeah.
Cool. So now let's go on with the core segment of this podcast, which is the race debrief of the Rift that you just won. So this race is notorious for the brutal terrain, the river crossing with all seen pictures of riders falling into the cold river down there, and the unpredictable elements. There are a lot of mechanicals on this course because yeah, it's a harsh terrain to ride on. So, how did you specifically prepare your body, your mindset, and maybe also your material for this adventure, if we call it like this, in the weeks leading up to it?
I'll answer that in 3 parts. So first, I'll talk about the equipment choices. And I think having experience an entire career as a mountain biker really prepares you well for something like that because you learn how to make the proper equipment choices to get yourself through the race because nothing's slower than breaking your bike or flatting. So I think people tend to push the limit and try to pick the fastest setup and the lightest setup and all of that, but for mountain biking, we know that that's not always the way to go. So I made some pretty conservative choices, or what I would say, just safe choices in my equipment. Particularly, I rode really large tires. I was riding a 225 and set up on my rims that actually measures more like a 23. So a really wide tire. I think that's I don't know what that is in millimeters, but a pretty wide mountain bike tire. And then little things, like, for example, I knew that it was gonna be really, really rough, and over 7 hours, that really can beat up your back, so I never do this, but I used a frame bag to put all of my nutrition in because I didn't want the weight of the gels on my lower back. So, like, small decisions like that, just to factor in the different, the ruggedness of the environment, I suppose. I also wore a lot more clothes than most people. I wore like a thermal vest, thermal arm warmers, a couple layers on my torso, which I probably didn't need, but the alternative is that you get too cold and then you can't really access everything you have. So I made a safe choice that way, I feel as well. And then in terms of, like, the mindset and my training leading into the race, I always train to be durable. That's what we've been working on for the past 15 years, 15 years of riding and training. That quality is always being worked on in a either a deliberate or just a passive way by virtue of training so much. So I didn't really do anything specifically for the Rift. My peak races are coming up later in the year, so it was part of my build for those races that are coming later. But again, you want to optimize the opportunity. So I made sure that I was well rested heading into the event so that not only could I perform, but also be in a position to gain the fitness benefits from that effort itself. You kind of have to be fresh enough in order for your body to adapt to that load that you're subjecting yourself to. And mentally, I mean, we could talk for 2 weeks about how to get in the right headspace to, get the best out of yourself on a day like that, but I think what it comes down to for me is that I have to approach an event like that with a sense of wonder and a sense of curiosity and not hold the outcome too tightly. Like, I wanted to win, that was something that I said at the beginning of the year, I wanted to win the Rift, but you can't grip that so tightly that you become, stressed or unable to adapt to whatever's happening out there. You have to really be like, you have to flow like water and let the race come to you and trust yourself that you'll be able to rise to whatever circumstance, mishap, whatever it is that's going on out there, and react appropriately. And I do that through a lot of visualization and seeing all the possible outcomes that could happen, all the possible things that could go wrong, and knowing that I have a plan of action for that eventuality. Yeah. I don't know, that's not a very concise answer, but
Yeah, but that's a really good one, and we can understand that all the choices are made through experience. So that's really good, and all tough, harsh courses like this and long
Mm,
races also in terms of time, it's really something that pays off.
mhm,
um, and walk us through the exact schedule from the moment you woke up on the race day
mhm.
until you were lined up at the start. What does your morning routine look like when you are about to face a almost 8 hour epic race?
Mhm. Yeah, so I mean, we do we do a lot of carb loading in the couple days before the race. On the actual race morning, I always wake up 3 hours before the event start. So I think that was I don't actually remember what time we started, but I think that meant I was up at 4. My pre-race meal is always pancakes, and I always travel with maple syrup from home, so it's pancakes and maple syrup about 2.5 hours before the event. Um, and then I do it's kinda like yoga, but I do just, make sure all my muscles are firing properly and I feel pretty good loose physically, and I have a little routine that I do for that. And then we always roll over to the start with about an hour to go before the start, just in case something goes wrong. Get your bike out. I have a whole checklist that I run through. So we've done all the mechanical prep the day before, but I'll set my pressures, double check that everything's spinning and working as it should. What else? I didn't warm up. I warm up if the race is going to be either really fast from the gun or is less than 4 hours. But for this event, I didn't warm up at all. I trusted that the neutral rollout would be enough. And also, it was just kind of cold and dark. So there was no point in warming up just to sit there. I also what else goes on the morning before the race? I typically time my caffeine and a dose of bicarb for a specific amount of time before, the predicted crux of the race. So before the predicted, first key selection is going to be made. So based on I did that on the start line. So a mix of Red Bull and bicarb was taken down. Um, and then we set out. And yeah, and the race started with maybe a 10-kilometer neutral, and then it, started to get a little spicy.
Yeah, so really great to know because age groupers and the audience can really, let's say, learn about this. And you seems to be somebody which is really professional in the approach because within the gravel peloton, I'm around many athletes and you have many different characters. Some are just waking up, shaking the legs, go to the race start by bike, and that's it. And others like you, making checklists, making sure everything is set it up properly, and you are ready to really start the race as you should be. So that's great that people can, let's say, be inspired by what you are doing at any level, and that preparation is key.
Yeah, preparation is key, and it's also a great way to relieve your anxiety. If you're someone that struggles with performance anxiety or nerves leading into a race, if you write it down, if you have a plan for yourself, then you've given yourself steps to get to the start line. And that anticipation, that's the worst part. That's when people feel the most stressed out. So if you have everything taken care of and you know you've not forgotten anything, it just alleviates a lot of that sort of stress.
And coming back to the race itself, so Erika Magnaldi and Morgan Aguirre established a lead from the first half of the race. Walk us through your pacing strategy. Were you staying loose and sticking to your own number, or were you a bit stressed about the gap and trying to bridge it quickly?
Mhm. So we started the first kind of key selection happened about 35 kilometers into the race, thereabouts. Rosa made a dig on a hill, and 4 of us were able to go with her. But I didn't position myself well in that line, and I was behind Erica, and Erica made a small mistake on just some loose stuff. She was running really narrow tires, which I think I think that made it more difficult for her to handle the rough terrain out there. Anyways, she hit the deck and we were both gapped off the that now trio, and Rosa looked over her shoulder and she saw that there were 2 people gone on the ground, and so she started to go a little further, so I was like, "Oh, no, that's it." So, they got away, and I just started to get into chasing mode, and it's interesting at the Rift because the vistas are so vast, so you can see people for a very long time, and I could see that they were about 45 seconds to a minute ahead for about an hour, and I could just see them, and the gap wasn't getting smaller, but it also wasn't really getting bigger, so I was pretty encouraged by that, and I knew that the back half of the race would be stronger for me, and it included more technical terrain, so I was banking on that working in my favor, but at the same time, going back to what I said about holding the outcome of the race loosely, I you kind of have to just let it go. Like, the leader was up the road, and all I can do is try as hard as I can and give my best effort and be smart about my effort, and it's either gonna work out or it's not, and that's okay. So, kind of with that sense of freedom, I was able to find a really good rhythm, and I was able to just kinda lock in, and I can't believe the race was 7.5 hours. It felt like I was out there for, like, 2. It was flying by because I was really zoned in. But at the same time, so maybe about an hour and change after that crash with Erica, I had almost bridged back, and then I just kind of lost focus for a second, and I had the hardest crash I've hit the hardest crash I've ever had. I hit the ground harder than I ever have on a mountain bike. It was hard enough that I didn't hit my head, but I stood up and I was kind of, like, confused about what had just happened and where I was, and my rear wheel wouldn't spin anymore, it was completely locked up. So, I was quite angry with myself for maybe 5 minutes, and it took me a second to get my wheel moving again, and I just felt really out of it, discombobulated and no longer in that zone of flow, and it was tricky to pivot to be able to lock back in, and I think the one of the real successes I had that day was that I was able to flow through that and just let it come back to me. So I didn't try to, like, get right back on the pedals and push it to 100 and go, go, go until and force myself back into race mode. I just started spinning and letting that kind of, like, coil back inwards into that zone of focus, and then, what do you know, an hour later, I linked back up with them. So it was really a story just of being present, I think, the whole day.
And you managed to close that gap on the long false flat descent
Mhm.
and ultimately at the end of the race won by 1 minute and 1 second.
Mm.
Really precisely in 7 hours 25 minutes and 50 seconds, crossing the line 4 minutes and 43 seconds ahead of the third place. So quite a large gap compared to what you explained. How deep into the red did
Mm.
you had to go to secure that victory once you have passed there and you were on the first place?
So I didn't, I caught the leaders. I was with the leaders when we started climbing Hecla volcano. So that was about 5 hours or 5.5 hours into the race. So we were a lead group at that point. And then Erica went off the front and then Rosa dropped out. So it was just Morgan and I working together. And then I couldn't see Erica. It was enough of a gap that we could no longer see her. And then this technical descent came. It was an off-camber, really long, open, sandy descent, like picture cyclocross. Like, it looked like that, except it was very, very long, and I just rode it really well. I just rode it like a mountain biker, and I didn't really intend to, but I put a pretty large gap into Morgan behind me, and by the end of that descent, I could actually see Erica again. I could see her white jersey in the distance. So I went pretty deep to catch her because there was a lot of pedaling. I didn't go you know, you don't go so far into the red that you can't think straight, but and I'm very good at pacing, like, I'm very good at metering out my effort to close gaps efficiently and slowly. Sometimes that's a detriment, maybe it would be better to close gaps quickly, but in this case, I did it slowly, and I caught her right before it got pretty sandy and technical, and that was good for me because it actually didn't mean that I had to go into the red to create the gap. I was able to do it on skill and just, like, the skill of a mountain bike background. But then when I had that sort of minute gap, I think it went out to about a minute 45 at the biggest it was, and it was a pretty big effort to hold it for that last hour. It was about 50 kilometers solo at the end, and that was challenging.
Talking about the challenge of those 40 last K, do you have one number from your head unit during this hard part of the race that you can give us? It's more for the listener to have a reality check about at what place gravel and women gravel is right now.
Do you mean a number in terms of power? Or what?
Power, speed,
Mm,
or heart rate, whatever you feel it's kind of not a crazy, but a good number
yeah.
to share to show the level of the gravel races right now.
I actually didn't I'd have to go back and look at my data because I haven't actually looked that closely at the last hour. I don't wear a heart rate strap when I race. I just it's irrelevant, and I when I actually race, I only look at my map screen. So I don't see any I see no data, I see no time, I just see the dotted line that I'm following. But I think the last 10 kilometers was on pavement, and I had to hold probably an average of, like, 35 to 35 to 36K an hour just to maintain the gap on that bit of pavement. Erica actually drew 15 seconds closer to me on that 8 kilometers at the end, so she would have been going faster than that. But the power, I mean, the power for the whole day was my average was a little over 200 and my normalized was around 230. So it's like it's like a and that's similar to what I would have done at the Traca. So it's not a crazy number, but it's pretty steady for that amount of time out there, and also and just given how rough it was, there was definitely a lot of, like, mountain bike style terrain where you can't put consistent power down on the pedals in that last couple hours. But then again, like, I did when I was, like, chewing stem as arrow as I could be for those last 8K, and a former teammate of mine, Toby Road, passed, and he cheered for me, and I was like, "What's the gap?" And he's like, "I don't know, I think it's big. Erica went for a swim." So,
Okay.
but I had no idea. So, anyways, I did look at my computer at that point, and it felt like I was doing, like, 300 watts, doing my 20-minute power, but I think it was like 210 at that point because you're so cooked. So it's very relative depending on how deep into the race you are and how dehydrated you are and all of that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
so the RPE was really high and
Mm,
you manage your race a bit this way and your effort this way, less
mhm,
about the number on your computer. And it's
definitely.
also
Yeah.
by experience that you can
Yeah,
race like this.
you know when you do it this long, you know typically that you can trust your sensations. However, for example, like in the start of the race when I had that Red Bull and the bicarb concoction flowing through my system, I might check in with power a little bit then because the risk is you go too hard because you have your sensations masked a little bit. So in the once you get through that though, get through that first hour and a half of being intelligent, then I ride by feel.
Iceland volcanic rock destroyed bikes and bodies. Let's talk about the setup. So you've touched on it about specific choices like the bags to hold everything you don't want to have in your back during 7 hours 30 minutes. What about gearing choices? Have you made specific change for the Rift?
Yeah, so I have 2 gravel bikes, and I always have one set up with, Explorer. So that's a for those who aren't familiar, that's a smaller cassette. I think it's a 1046 is the gear spread on the back. So it's a stiffer gear. I run that drivetrain when the hills are not as significant, but I knew the Rift was going to be pretty steep, and I knew there were going to be some loose sections. So I opted to run, like, transmission or Eagle. So that goes up to a 52 tooth in the back, and I was relative to that cog, I was actually running quite a small chainring by my standards, so I was running a 46 in the front, and that was deliberate for the Rift, but it's also a setup that I use whenever it's sort of unknown terrain, could be rough, could be very steep, and I had never seen anything at the Rift, so I made that choice.
Yeah, you have more versatility with
Mhm,
those new type of gravel cassette coming from the mountain bike also.
mhm, mhm.
And you touched also about the tire widths that you've selected, mountain bike tires. What were your pressures for the front and the rear? Do you remember?
Yeah, yeah, so that's something I record. I always record pretty much every ride and every race, the gear that I ran and what the setup was. So I was running Vittoria Torino XC Pro in the race casing. It's the same tread as the T30 when it's in the gravel lineup, but this tire is considered in the mountain bike lineup, and I specifically chose that tire because of the casing. So I was trying to decide between running a 55 or this larger mountain bike tire, and I really like how supple the mountain bike rubber is, so that's what I opted for. And then I run 17 PSI in the front and 18 in the rear.
So not so much, but you should be also light riders.
I mean, I'm not that light, I don't think, but I am comfortable. I use Stan's race sealant, and I trust it a lot, so I'm pretty comfortable hitting rim. Maybe I shouldn't be, but I hit both front and rear rim once in that race. And it's soft, but it helps you float over all the sand. So maybe that's my one risky decision I make is sometimes I run relatively low pressure because the tire deforms over things better.
Yeah, and also coming from MTB, we know that the line choice is really
Mhm.
important
Mhm.
in gravel to avoid the punctures. Also on the races like Paris-Roubaix, we heard this since a lot of time with Mathieu Van Der Poel never have a flat tire except this year.
Mhm.
We all know about. But it's really important on the gravel side. And with the MTB technique that you acquired all the years you raced on the XCO side, it should be, it, it's really an advantage, I think, on your side.
Yeah, definitely. Mhm.
Let's talk about the drivetrain. So we used to say that there was a debate on one buy and a two buy, but it seems that now it's settled with a lot of elite pro athletes riding only one buy with the bigger cassette also we have right now. And so you run a one buy, but are you doing this for all the races or you still have in your mind sometimes the two buy choice?
No, so I'm running SRAM, and I wouldn't run a 2 by ever on a gravel bike. I just don't think with the range in the cassette that you would even need it, and it's one less thing that could potentially break. Like, when you're out there for that long in such unpredictable terrain, the fewer things on your bike that could, malfunction on you, the better. It's even like when I ride really long mountain bike races, sometimes I will pick a hardtail purely because there's just less things on it. There are less things that could require maintenance or could malfunction. So definitely I'm a one by person.
Last question about the Rift and to finish this part of the pod. So you won the Rift as a privateer. Have you felt that something changed after this, or it's too quick? Because we know the biggest race on the calendar, when you win it, it's really like unbound track is could be life changing for
Mhm.
a gravel athlete those days. But the Rift is like the one of the biggest race of the calendar, but the second tier. So have you felt that maybe something changed in the yeah, maybe the request from the press, the media, or on social that you've seen something grow exponentially after?
Not so much. I mean, there's certainly more traffic driven towards you online when you win a race like that, but I just don't really pay attention to it that much. To be honest, I don't really consume a lot of cycling media, and I try not to consume my own media either. That's born out of the lessons I've learned over a really long career as well, is just that it's not sustainable and it pulls your focus away from what is actually important to me. Yeah, so I don't know, I haven't really paid attention to it so much. I enjoy sharing about the race. I There's a lot of beautiful imagery, and I like to share that from the race, but, no, nothing has changed, and I don't think even if I won world championships, I don't think that would change anything for me at this point. Like, it just doesn't I race for me, and I race for the joy and the frustration and the opportunity to just, like, put myself in there and grow and learn and feel alive, and, whether I'm, 1st or 40th, it just doesn't matter that much to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's good to know that you focus more on your own performance. If you are able to give 100% and you are
Mhm.
satisfied with the result anyway, whether you are on the top spot or a bit lower in the rankings, and that's a good mentality to have.
Yeah, I mean, like, winning is fun. We're not gonna you can't ignore that, you can't pretend that's not true, but it is very transient, and even the joy of winning the Rift, the joy of winning, that lasts for 36 hours before your brain goes into, "I want more, I want what's next." But the joy of knowing that you can lock into the moment and rise to a challenge that you set for yourself and do something you didn't think you could do, that is that's sustaining. That feels like, like a lifeblood. So, um, both are fun, both are important, but that's kind of where my focus is now.
And let's go on the future of gravel because the peloton is evolving quite fast right now.
Mhm.
And on your side, having won the Lifetime Grand Prix overall ranking in 2022, and since then, how have you seen the women elite gravel field evolve in terms of depth, speed, tactics over the last few years and on those big races, especially?
Yeah, so I mean, depth and talent are obviously increasing exponentially. That's something that like anyone can see. Um, the speed has also come way up. Well, yeah, it has come way up. I think it's very odd to do a race that we don't average more than 30 kilometers an hour. The Rift was an exception because of how rough it was, but the speeds are high. Tactically, there are opportunities now for team tactics, and there are teams who can implement team tactics, but we're not seeing it executed that much yet. I think it's coming. I think probably from 2027 onwards, it will become extremely difficult to win any of these races if you don't have at least one teammate. I think that's going to become unavoidable. But then you also have to say, like, the trajectory between Europe, North America, and the rest of the world, the races are evolving in very different ways, and a lot of that is due to what the races are, where they are, what the terrain is like, what the culture of the sport is in that specific area. So it's hard to make blanket generalizations, but I think we can be confident that teamwork is going to become crucial.
Yeah, we are seeing more and more structured,
Mhm.
almost out style teams, entering
Mhm.
the dirt. But it's taking also some time because now you have the specialized off-road team, which is really organized, and other seems to have other kind of structure,
Mhm.
and it's growing. So I'm pretty sure also we will see a lot more organized team coming, like the Canyon one, which is working well on the women's side this year. But as a privateer, how do you see this team structuring impacting the future of the sport? Are you agreeing with the way we are engaging the sport right now with the team, or do you think the true privateer model can survive?
If I'm being really honest, no, I don't think the true privateer model will survive much longer. It's a big strain on brands and on individuals. It's an inefficient way for brands to spend their marketing dollars because they're working with a whole bunch of individual people and everyone's got different schedules and it's just less efficient. So from a business and a marketing standpoint, a team model I think makes more sense. And performance-wise, that's people who have teammates, teams are going to be who start to win these big races at least. Maybe not, the Rift, that might never be won because of team tactics, because of how technical it is. The technical aspect of a race is sort of a hedge against the benefits of tactics or team tactics. But I don't think the privateer model will survive that much longer.
If we compare also the US to the global racing, let's take the US and everything else. You used to race in North America heavily, but you also travel globally, big races across Europe. How does the vibe of the race and the tactical approach compare the US scene and the rest of the world? Do you feel something different outside of the race course, which could be a bit more technical and tricky in the European scene?
So far, the events that I have done, well, first of all, you can't paint North America with one brush because it's so big. There's so like I would almost say that you have to divide it by style of races. So there's the lifetime races, which are not technical. They're long, they're open, they're typically in the Midwest. It's a very specific type of racing. But then you have things like the BWR, a series which is more technical, or you have just a whole host of sort of standalone events that are not owned by Lifetime that tend to be more technical, particularly in Canada. A lot of our racing up here, like it's rare to find a gravel race that does not have single track in it. So you can't paint them all by the same brush. But if we're going to say compare Lifetime to European races, the European races in my experience so far are more technical and I tend to enjoy those courses more because they suit my skill set and they're a little bit more dynamic in that way. Yeah, so there are differences, but again, I think you have to look at the different types of racing that exist in North America to make comparisons to those pockets of it as opposed to just like the whole nation.
And if we go forward onto your race calendar, so it was just confirmed that you will be lining up for the UCI Gravel World Championships in Australia. However, this race clashes with the Lifetime Grand Prix events like Lidl and Beach Sugar, meaning a lot of lifetime focus field won't be there. How did you make the decision to do this world? Because it's a long trip also for everybody, which is not based in Down Under. And also, this is potentially the last World Championship before UCI started distributing big points that could benefit for the world to road teams. And so, what is your take on this shift? And are you about to see road teams completely take over the UCI, at least the World Championship, not the whole gravel circuit because there are other things involved. But yeah, what is your point of view on this?
So there's so many parts of that question. So first of all, yes, it conflicts with Little Sugar, which is a mountain bike race that's in the Lifetime Grand Prix series. I think you're going to see a lot of the Lifetime Grand Prix athletes going to gravel world championships and skipping Little Sugar. I just don't think you can have a conflict, and there shouldn't be a conflict. I hope that they get their stuff sorted in the future so that they're not claiming to be the biggest off-road series in the world, but then conflicting with the world championship in that discipline. That doesn't add up in my brain. I'll still go to Big Sugar, which is the following weekend after Gravel Worlds. But getting to that area in Arkansas from where I live is almost as hard as getting to Australia. Like, it's not easy to get to Arkansas. It's also really expensive. So I think I'm spending an extra 8 hours in travel as opposed to what I would expend to get to Arkansas, so
Okay.
that's not really I mean, doesn't really factor into it for me that much. But mostly, I'm drawn to these big races where I get the chance to either represent my nation or put myself in a position that really lights me up, and Worlds is doing that for me. It's really invigorating, so I'm excited to do that event. The fact that the point structure is going to change from this year forward doesn't really factor in at all for me. I think it's unfortunate that that's going to be that it is going to privilege world tour riders in that way, but I also feel after, an entire career on the mountain bike in a UCI specific discipline that I insulate myself from those politics a little bit because we're just a cog in their system sometimes, and I can't really do anything about it, and not all the decisions make sense to me. Most of the decisions don't often make sense to me, and I'm a person who says it is what it is, and I'm just gonna race my bike anyways, and I'll figure it out, which is probably a cop out in some ways, but that's how I look at it.
And what are the next targets for you? You could tell us about the main goal for the rest of your season after winning the Rift, which and I'm pretty sure was one of the main goal of the start of the season. And any big targets left on the calendar for you outside of the World Championship that we just talked about?
Yeah, definitely. So the remainder of the year, I have 3 big target events. Canadian Marathon Nationals are at the beginning of September, and the following weekend is Marathon Mountain Bike Worlds. So those are 2 of my big targets, and then, UCI Gravel Worlds. So those championship events were always my focus of the year. That and then Cape Epic and the Traka. Those were my other, big ticket events. So the year is building towards September, October, and that's what I've been focused on the whole, since November of last year. And then in addition to that, I'm in a pretty intensive period of my doctorate that has a few conflicts with other races. So, for example, I can't do Leadville because I have an exam period that I'm working on. So, balancing both of those things has meant that I've had to be very deliberate about my schedule for the rest of the year, and I've chosen to prioritize these championship events.
And last question of the show, that's a question I ask to every guest. So if you could have win only one races during this season, that could be ones which are still on the calendar to race, or ones you've already raced this year, which one will it be and why?
Which one would I have chosen to win?
Yeah.
I'll give you an answer for the ones that have passed and then the ones coming up. I would have chosen to win the Chaka. That was the goal for me. I'm still happy with how I performed, but I want more and I'm going back for more. And then, gravel worlds. Like we all have dreams of rainbows and it's probably unrealistic. But it's a dream goal and I am going to try to get as close to it as I can.
It could be really good to finally see the rainbow jersey on gravel races with
Yeah.
riders
Well,
doing
I
gravel
will
races all year long.
I will predict that the person who wins is going to be a gravel specialist this year. That's my prediction. I hope it's me. It's probably not gonna be me, but we'll try.
Yeah, we'll cross finger for you, and we'll follow this, and I'll be really happy to see you win and wear this jersey next year on the top races of the gravel calendar. Could be really really good.
Thanks.
So thanks a lot for your time. I know it's really precious for you with everything you are doing on the race side, but also outside of it. And as you explained, with the PhD and the Competere program and so on, I'll list all the links to the description, to the podcast description if people want to check it out. And yeah, thanks a lot for the time and good luck for the next races and the end of the season.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on. It was a lovely chat.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Gravel Paddock. If you want to stay ahead of the peloton, the best thing you can do right now is hit that subscribe or follow button. If you enjoyed the deep dive, please drop a 5-star rating and leave a comment. For more inside access between episodes, follow us on Instagram at the Gravel Paddock. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode. Ride hard.